Hello, everyone. Welcome to Envirothon 2021. My name is Cassie Hauswald, and I am a freshwater ecologist with the Nature Conservancy. I'm going to share with you today about some of Indiana's aquatic resources, our rivers and streams, some things that live in those places, and some things that threaten those. We'll wrap up with a couple of reports on water quality in Indiana, and then I will look forward to a question and answer session with you at a later date. So we've got a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so let's get started. I'm going to share my screen now. So as I mentioned, I work for the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is a not-for-profit conservation organization. We have offices all over the world and offices all over Indiana. So I work in southern Indiana, and I also spend time in central and northern Indiana through my work. So I get to be all over the state, which I love, and get to know about our wonderful resources. So you probably know that water on Earth is scarce. And so this graphic, and I don't know if my screen is hiding that for you, but it's hiding it for me. Let me move. So water is scarce. We have most of the water on Earth is salt water. And then even of the fresh water that occurs on the Earth's surface, most of that is tied up in groundwater and glaciers. So we don't have a lot of water in our fresh water available to us in our rivers and streams, less than 1%. So water is scarce, and it's important that we take care of it. We think in Indiana that water is very abundant, and it is. We are blessed, but it is scarce worldwide, and it could become scarce in our future. So I'm going to talk today a lot about watersheds, and so it's good to have a working definition of what a watershed is. And what that means is it's an area which everything that's within a boundary drains to a point. And so for Indiana, if we think about the Wabash River is draining most of our state, the watershed for the Wabash is 2/3 of Indiana. And it flows to the Ohio River, and where it meets the Ohio River, it becomes part of another watershed. But we also have sub-watersheds, and I'll get into this a little more, but you can find your watershed at this website here, since I'm presenting virtually, and I don't know where your geography is. It would be best for you to look up where the water that you use and live in drains. So this is an example of how I think about watersheds. And so I've got a lot of work going on in the Upper White River, which is in central Indiana. I've got some counties listed here. Some of you may be from some of these places. And so, for instance, Cicero Creek is right here. This is a watershed. But Cicero Creek is part of a bigger watershed, which is outlined in faint blue. You can see that's all of this outline is the Upper White River watershed. So there's many sub-watersheds, and even within Cicero Creek, then we could get down to smaller watersheds. So they are defined by something called the Hydrologic Unit Code, a HUC. You'll hear that term if you get into watershed work very much. And so it's just a way to think about the water on the land and spatially how that drains. And so all of this is draining down this way, and it eventually ends up in the Wabash River. So here's a picture of the Wabash River watershed. And so as I mentioned, it's a much bigger watershed, and that White River watershed would occur in this area. It would be what we would call a sub-watershed of the Wabash. And then the Wabash drains into the Ohio, and that would be an even bigger watershed. And so it's interesting when I talk to school groups and even adults, when I ask them what a watershed is, a lot of times people have this look on their face and they say, well, it's this little shed out back. Well, no, it's where the water drains. And so now you know, and you don't have an excuse to not be able to answer that question. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the special rivers in Indiana, and the Wabash is a special river. This is the lower Wabash, further downstream in southwest Indiana, and this is the river here. But now the river doesn't go that way. The river goes my mouse is not going real fast here. It goes right through here. So the river has cut a new channel, and this is being cut off. And we'll talk a little bit about that, I think, in the next slide. Yes, so there's a really special type of water feature in Indiana called an oxbow lake. I am doing a lot of work researching and studying these right now, and these again occur in Southwest Indiana. You can see the location here where I'm talking about, so on the border of Indiana and Illinois. And an oxbow lake, this is an oxbow right here, and they're named for the collar that an ox used to wear, so an oxbow. This is the Wabash River, and the Wabash used to flow this way. It's an old channel of the river that's been cut off for some reason. And so now the Wabash flows this way, and this water only gets connection, or the water only comes into the oxbow at certain times of the year during spring flooding or fall or winter flooding, whenever. And so these are great habitats for big river fish. And that's the reason that we're studying them. They just attract wildlife like mad. And so this is a picture of what one looks like if you're actually out there. They're really fun places to kayak. They're not very deep. They're just lovely little spots on the land that are really hard to find and really hard to get to. They're very remote. And so they're one of the least understood and studied ecosystems in the state. So it's really fun to get to be out there and learning about these places. So this is a picture of an alligator gar, and unfortunately this one is dead. Alligator gar have been gone in Indiana for I don't even know how long enough that there is no season on when you can or if you can fish for alligator gar. And so this gentleman actually caught this fish. He didn't know what he was catching. And of course he did the right thing. He reported it to the Indiana DNR. So what's really cool about this animal, a number of things. First of all, it's got the name alligator in it. You can see those teeth. It's a prehistoric type of fish. He was bow fishing and caught it. This fish is thought to be gone in Indiana, and this animal had a radio, a pit tag in it, kind of like your dog would have a pit tag. Maybe if your dog gets lost and they can read that barcode. Same thing for a lot of wildlife. This had a pit tag in it, and it was released in Kentucky in 2009 as part of a reintroduction program there. And the really neat thing about this is that the animal made it into the Wabash Basin and then up the Wabash to the White and into an oxbow lake. And they need those oxbow lakes, that slow moving water, to reproduce. And they also are just a fish eating machine. And so you think about the Asian carp that we have, which are an invasive fish species. These things would definitely be liking to eat those. And so what's great about this is that we have a free-flowing river that they can get into. And so I didn't mention earlier that the Wabash is special. And it's special because of its fish diversity, so many different fish species. And the reason that we have that diversity is that the Wabash is the longest undammed section of river east of the Mississippi. And so what that means is from the Ohio River, 411 miles upstream to Huntington, Indiana, there are no dams. That's very uncommon for large rivers. Most of our large rivers have been dammed for navigation. The Wabash was not dammed, and it hasn't been dammed for water supply, which makes it incredibly species rich and a very special place. And it's why the Nature Conservancy is interested in the Wabash. And so the fact that this fish can make it from down in Kentucky all the way up into Knox County is pretty incredible and speaks to the open and wild nature of the Wabash River. Another big fish species that we have in Indiana are lake sturgeon. This is also in the White River, the East Fork of the White River. The East Fork flows sort of in a southwesterly direction, starts up in the Henry County area and goes through Columbus and the tributaries to it. And this fish is also pit tagged. She's a pretty old girl. And the really cool thing about this fish, aside from the fact that it's an endangered animal, it's not very common, and it still can live in Indiana's in the White River because of the clean water in the East Fork. was that they just continued to grow and grow and grow. And I can't remember how much this fish weighed, but the exciting thing this day was that we found babies that weren't pit tagged. So we were finding new animals, which means they're reproducing. And that's pretty exciting to see baby animals coming into the system. That's something I think about a lot is we might have old animals, but do we have young that are filling in the gaps? And so you are young people who are coming to take over the role of conservation and environmental work in our state and beyond. And the same thing for animals. Are there young ones coming in to fill in for the old ones that we're losing? So another watershed that I've spent a lot of time in and is my home is the Blue River watershed in South Central Indiana. And so this is the Blue River watershed, and this is the Ohio River Basin watershed that I mentioned earlier. So this gives you some indication of where we are. This area of Indiana right through here is called the karst region. Meaning caves. And so this area has a lot of cave drainage, and the Blue River is a classic karst stream. So this image I wanted to show you, this is Indian Creek, and this is the Blue River. And there's no seeming connection. You don't see any blue lines connecting the two. So these are all the stream miles. There's nothing connecting these. However, when we put, someone many years ago in the 1960s put dye in here at Corydon at a place called the Sinks of Indian Creek, which is where the stream disappears and goes underground and then comes back up further downstream. But if you watch that dye, it came out 4 miles away at a place called Harrison Spring, the largest spring on the Blue River. And so these streams are connected through an underground channel, through a cave channel. These streams are connected, but on the surface, there's no connection. So it's important to think about what's going on the land here because it influences the Blue River down here. This is just a map showing you land use. And that's something that I think about a lot is what's going on the land that could be a detriment to water or could be helping water. And so what you'll see, these are headwaters. We call the top of the watershed where the watershed starts. This is Clark State Forest, a lot of green. And then you start seeing yellow as pasture or hay land. And we got a lot of that. We don't have a lot of row crop. The brown is row crops, corn and soybeans, but we get the most of that through the central band here. And then we get into Harrison Crawford State Forest, another forested area. And so really my efforts focus in this central part where we have some things that could degrade water quality. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. What that looks like on the ground is this. And so this is the town of Palmyra. If anyone here is from Harrison County, shout out to you. These are sinkholes. And so you can see the sinkhole has been fenced off. And so the cattle can't get in there. There's just sinkholes all over the place. And what that ends up translating to in the river in many places is really clean cobble, clean gravel. And these are riffles. You can see the white, the little bit of white. The Blue River is a really fun river to canoe or kayak. And fish that live in there are, this is one, this is the spotted darter. You can see his spots and his blue coloring. They're just like a bird. They get real colorful in the spring when they're breeding, and they're easier to tell apart from one another at that point in time. This is not a common darter, and darters are little bitty fish. They dart in and out of riffles that I just showed you, and they eat a lot of invertebrates. And so if you don't have clean gravel, you don't have darters. And so the Blue River has a lot of darters because we have a lot of clean gravel. We also have the hellbender salamander, which you may have heard about. Purdue University is doing a lot of work, a lot of study of this animal. The Blue River is the last river in Indiana where it still occurs, and where Purdue is growing them in their labs, and zoos across Indiana are rearing them to return to the river. I want to point out this little bit of goop here. Another name for hellbender is snot otter. Old lasagna sides, they are fully aquatic salamander. They do not come out of the river, and so they have skin that breathes, and so they need clean water. They need high highly oxygenated water, and that's the reason that they're gone from a lot of our streams. All the direct tributary streams to the Ohio River would have, or many of them would have once had hellbender salamanders. And I showed you Indian Creek. They used to occur in Indian Creek. They're gone now from that creek, but we're hoping that they can be reintroduced. We've done some dam removals on that stream to improve habitat, excuse me. And so we're hopeful that we can get all of our eggs out of one basket. But this is really a face only a mother could love, right? They're not a sweet, charismatic animal, but they are really cool. They feel like mud come to life when you hold them. And they're North America's largest salamander. They're about 2 feet long. So I encourage you to look up Help the Hellbender. That's Purdue's effort to bring these guys back from the brink of blinking out from Indiana. My particular area of study is freshwater mussels. And so this graphic just shows you some of the variety. Indiana had over 75 species of freshwater mussels historically. The Wabash River had about 75 and now has about 60 that still occur there. Some of those are extinct, they're gone from the world, but many of them are just not in the Wabash River any longer. And so we hope by our efforts to clean water and to do things to make habitat better, that some of these can be brought back. And so I'd like to point out some of the names, in particular, pink heel splitter. So you see this, it's called a keel on the animal. And that just speaks to how frequently I feel people once encountered these animals with bare feet, that they stepped on it, split their heel open, and they have these names. And so fawn's foot, this sort of resembles, if you see it in real life, it does resemble the foot of a deer. Elephant ear looks, if you put it up to your face, it looks like an elephant's ear. And this is the species that I've done a lot of study on. We have these in the Blue River. The oldest one that we found, which you could age them by sectioning them like a tree, was 72 years old, and here's the sad thing, the youngest was 45 years old. So my age exactly, and there are no young coming up after it. And so what's going on with this animal? And that was the research that I did to help determine that the fish host, these are parasites when they're babies, they're parasites on fish gills, and the fish host for this animal is missing from the Blue River. The water quality isn't a problem, it's the fish. And mussels are really important to stream ecology. They filter, each mussel filters about 15 gallons of water a day, and that means they're taking nutrients and bacteria out of the water and processing that. So they really are the little engineers, the little water quality plants in the river. And when we start seeing them decline, it tells us, one, that there may be something wrong with the water quality, but we also lose that function. And so we want to have robust populations of mussels. And that's, once again, there's a lot in the Wabash River, and there's a lot to work with. So I want to show you, I just mentioned that mussels are parasites. I want to show you this video to demonstrate that the parasitic relationship. And so we're in a lab here. This is called a snuff box mussel, and its host fish is a log perch, which is a small little, darter, and it likes to look for its food by kind of rooting its snout under rocks. So this mussel just grabbed that fish, and she's now got a hold of him, and she's pumping her larvae onto its gills. It can't get loose. She's not going to kill the fish. That would not be a good strategy if you're a parasite, to kill your host. So what she will do is release her larvae and then let the fish go and move on. This is unique in that this is her strategy. This is the stuff box strategy, but other mussels have different lures. Some of them release packets into the environment that look like a worm, and so some have smelly lures that attract, like a catfish. So all different kinds of variety going on right under our noses, right in our streams, and people don't know about this, so it's pretty fascinating. Need to check my time here. Okay, so I think we're doing good on time. I want to talk a little bit about land use, which is I've shown you some of the unique things about our rivers in Indiana. Now we're going to move into the not so fun part of what's impacting those. So I want you to think for a moment, maybe even close your eyes and think about a forest, and think about rain falling on that forest or falling on that prairie, some kind of native vegetation. And what would happen to that water is it moved through the forest or the grassland. It would be slowed down, right? And the soil is going to absorb that water and release it slowly to a stream or river or spring underground. So when we start removing our native vegetation and moving to something that looks like this, where we have to live, what happens to water when it hits a roof versus a leaf? What happens to water when it hits a street versus a river? It speeds up, right? And it gets faster. And so that has implications for downstream. And so always I'm thinking of, I know we're never going back to this pristine condition. We have to have places to live. How do we work with nature and learn from nature to implement practices on the ground that help us to do a better job of handling our water and taking care of our rare water that you saw how uncommon fresh water is. So this schematic can help you to think about some of the impacts that um, water management has. So if you have a native vegetation, you get runoff, you get infiltration, that's spelled incorrectly there, and you have a base flow of groundwater is what this is talking about. When you start developing, you get faster runoff, less infiltration, and less base flow. And so you also are having more evapotranspiration. And as our climate is changing and things are heating up, that's happening even more. We do know in Indiana that in most of our streams, um, uh, precipitation is actually increasing. We're not seeing a decrease in precipitation, but we're seeing these really heavy rain events that the lands, now that we don't have as much native vegetation, the land can't deal with with the fast runoff that we're getting. And so we're getting some problems in our streams because of it. This just shows you, another impact from land use is all the runoff from our streets and from how what we're putting on our lawns, how we're growing our crops that feed us. So this graphic shows you the biggest flood events that have occurred in New Harmony, which is at the lower end of the Wabash River. So the end of Indiana, right before it goes into the Ohio River. So what we're sending on downstream to our neighbors. And what I just want to point out is that that of the 11 largest flood events measured, how frequent those have become since the 1990s, when we're starting to see this really big increase in rain. And so we're also seeing a timing change, so that really big floods are coming a little more like in late winter, and the land is just bare. Think about what it looks like around where you live. We live in Indiana, right? We're an agricultural state, and so we have a lot of land that's bare. There's nothing there's no native vegetation when there's not when we aren't growing a crop. And so we have all this bare land, and then we have all these neighborhoods. And so all that water is just coming faster. And it can translate to something like this. So this is a farm field in central Indiana. This is after a rain event in 2008. And you see, it was a huge event, a rain event, and you can see the damage caused in this field. Think about the volume of water that had to do this, but also the volume of soil loss. And so this crop is not going to grow as well now because there's a lot of repair that's going to have to happen in that field, not to mention all the valuable that's soil, that's land, that's value right there washed away. So we talk some about soil health. We are talking a lot more about that in Indiana. And Indiana is a leader in soil health. We are leading in cover crop adoption. And so this would be a field that doesn't have a living cover, and this is a field with a living cover. And when you think again about that vegetation, that native vegetation, this is not native, of course, but it's vegetation. And so we've got water falling on something to slow it down and let it infiltrate versus fall on bare ground and run off right away. Indiana also has really good drainage. So we know that Indiana has to be drained in order to farm. In order to be able to make the land productive, we have to get all the excess water. We were once a swamp through most of northern Indiana in particular. And you'll notice that if you drive around, you'll see the really dark soils. That's peat and that's organic matter. And so what the problem with this is that our drains are V-shaped, and so they're meant to convey water really quickly and get it downstream. But you see what happens downstream is that we have fields that are losing whole fields because of our drainage. And so that is an issue that leads to this problem, which is excess nutrients. And so you maybe have seen graphs or heard about the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico, which is down here every year. The U.S. Geologic Survey measures how big the hypoxic zone is in the Gulf of Mexico, and that is an area that's dead. Nothing can live in that. It causes the water to lose all of its oxygen because of the excess algae that grows and is supported by all these nutrients. So here we're looking at nitrogen, and this is Indiana. The darkest color represents our yield, how much nitrogen we're exporting, which is not a good thing. We want to keep that nitrogen on our fields to grow our crops, to grow our grass, to make our lawns look nice. We want to keep those nutrients in place. And so we have to be thinking about, why are our soils so what I call leaky? And they're leaky because of those drains that I showed you. We drain this land, and we have tile drainage within our farm fields that's meant to get the water out and away. And we have to rethink, we need to rethink how we manage water on the land so that we're not exporting all of our water and all of our pollution. So we also in Indiana see in many places a lack of a riparian buffer. Riparian refers to the area right along a river or stream. And so this is a creek that actually is running through my family's farm. And this is an old picture. It does not look this bad now. And so we have programs with our Natural Resource Conservation Service that can go in and plant trees. And that the reason that a riparian buffer is good is that one, if you have trees growing along here, all this soil, any soil or herbicide that would run off is going to get captured and filtered by those trees. It's also going to shade the stream so that fish and birds can live here, because right now this is hot. Hot water means we have less oxygen, and less oxygen means we don't get those darters, we don't get those invertebrates, we don't get those mussels. Another problem that we see in some areas of Indiana are livestock access to streams. So you can see this. We're taking a canoe trip, going down the river, and here's a cow pooping in the water. We don't do that ourselves, and we shouldn't allow our livestock to do that either. So there are programs, again, that are meant to fence cattle out and keep our streams clean. And I mentioned earlier dams, and so this is a dam that was on Big Indian Creek in Corydon, and it is now gone as of last fall. Fall of 19, and as is another upstream dam. And so this dam was this one was 10 feet tall and about 200 feet wide. And so fish, hellbenders, the mussels that need the fish, nothing is moving upstream of this. These are a barrier in our streams. They mess up the distribution of energy, and they prevent animals from moving around. And so there's a big effort in Indiana to remove dams. So we'll move now into some of the things that are being done to address these problems. So I just mentioned dam removal is one. Soil health, cover crops. And so this is, again, a picture like I showed you earlier, showing a field with some cover crop trials in it and a field without. Now they are doing no-till. When you see stubble like this and you don't see the earth being tilled up, that's no-till. That's a soil saving practice. And then cover crops are another that we have a goal right now in Indiana. The Nature Conservancy does, working with many partners, the Indiana State Department of Agriculture and Indiana Department of Environmental Management, many DNR, to get 50% of row crop acres practicing soil health. And so that means testing your soil to understand what nutrients you need, so you're not applying too much nitrogen or too much phosphorus in places in your fields that don't need it. And we're also really promoting cover crops as a way to help improve the structure of the soil, what's living in the soil, and then also improve the water movement across the land and into our rivers and streams. Another practice that we are promoting is a two-stage ditch. And so I showed you the ditch that looked like a V. And so a two-stage understands that drainage is necessary to farm in Indiana. We're not we have to figure out ways to work within that artificial system. And so it takes the concept of making the drain look like this and making it more trapezoidal, where water can sit in there and the nutrients can filter out on these benches that can feed vegetation, and it can slow the flow of water downstream to your neighbor. And so these are expensive, but they last a long time. And so we're working with predominantly county surveyors to do these kind of practices. And I'll give a shout out here to Howard County, where the surveyor has really embraced this concept and is doing this to try to help with just to make the streams function better and to help his workload, honestly, so that he's getting less complaints, because you call your county surveyor when your field's not draining. Another thing that we're doing in Indiana is we have a goal of restoring an additional 20,000 acres of floodplain in the lower Wabash River basin. And so this is a picture of the lower Wabash, and you can see all the, here's the river channel, but you can see how the water is able to move out into here. And that's awesome, because what that does is that's also slowing the flow of water, and it's letting those nutrients and the sediment, you can see how dirty this water is, the soil, settle on the floodplain, so that that nutrient loss that we saw that's going to the Gulf of Mexico gets deposited in Indiana. We're building our soil, we're building our wealth back by doing this. And these floodplains are not great areas to farm because they flood so frequently. And so they become great habitat for things like I've jumped ahead here, not freshwater mussels so much, but whooping cranes and things that like to feed in those areas. And then also waterfowl, migratory waterfowl really use Southwest Indiana to satisfy their needs when they're migrating. And those big river fish, so those alligator gar, buffalo, different types of big river fishes, and you can look some of those up to see what are using those floodplains. Something that I'm working on in Indiana is freshwater mussel augmentation. And this is just the idea that we take animals from the rivers and breed them in captivity and have babies to put out. We put tags on them so we can monitor their growth. And you can see this is how big the animal was when it was released. And this is how much growth in a year's time, how much that animal grew, meaning the stream is healthy and is supporting them. And we're doing some studies right now in the Wildcat Creek and in the Upper White to understand what species, not so much what species can thrive, but what areas of streams are suitable for mussels, where we can do some augmentation and get them back there. As I mentioned, they're very long-lived animals, and so we kind of need to help them over this hump where they got to such low numbers that they need a little hand up. And so we're working on that with the Department of Natural Resources. So as part of your objective this year, I know you are learning about our water resources from a regulatory standpoint and groundwater. And so I really am not an expert in this area, but I wanted to point out a couple studies. This one was commissioned by the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. And so commerce, you think economics, and that is true. They're thinking about how does Indiana develop with where our water resources are. And so this is just a color-coded graph. And so it shows you, where you get less water, groundwater, and where you get more. And so unsurprisingly, Southern Indiana, this is that karst band that I was telling you about. There's not a lot of groundwater, but up here in Northern Indiana, you get, here, this green, this is pretty 600 gallons a minute. That's pretty rich. And then over 1,000 gallons a minute up here in some of the glacial till areas draining to the Great Lakes, and then a little bit along the Wabash and the White River riparian zones, you get really high groundwater availability. So I encourage you to check out this study. It'll have a whole lot more information than I can give you here in this amount of time. And then the other study that I want to point out is one by the Conservation Law Center that was a counter to the commerce study that really looks at the environment and what do we need to think of in terms of water availability from an environmental standpoint. And so I'll just point out that this graph shows increase in groundwater irrigation from groundwater. And so Indiana, certainly occurs in that. And we really see that in the northern third of the state, increases in irrigation. And so as we have a maybe drier times of the year in the summer, late summer, and longer periods of drought, that we could see that irrigation increase. And so we don't want our streams to go dry. We don't want people to be without water. And so we have to think about how we manage our water resources. And so I'll encourage you to look these two reports up. I also encourage you to think about, in terms of groundwater or surface water, looking up where your water comes from. I like to ask this whenever we're in person, where does your water come from? And a lot of people don't know. And so I encourage you to take the time to learn where your water comes from that you're drinking. Does it come from the groundwater? Does it come from surface water? And then how clean is that water? Are you confident in what's happening where that water is coming from, that it's clean? And if not, think about ways that you can be an advocate for cleaner water and for conservation. So I believe with that, I will wrap up and stop sharing. And just thank you all for your attention. You're a really good and quiet audience. And I look forward to meeting you in the future. Good luck with your Envirothon competition.